yeah, so just a few books that I kind of use. This is a really great one for lilies, irises, and monocots. I don't know if anyone's seen this one, Gardening with California Monocots. It's a really great resource for some local grasses and monocots. And then, of course, Nevin Smith's Native Treasures is another nice one. It goes more into depth into certain genuses of manzanitas and CNPS, and he talks about propagation and other growing tips. And then, of course, most people probably have this one now. And there's a lot of good information in all these. Yeah, I just wanted to present that. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about riparian natives and kind of a quick overview. Let's see. It's my outline. So I'm just going to talk about what riparian means. And I've kind of divided it into a few sections. I've divided it into coastal redwood riparian, which is more, you get quite an array of different plants in that community than like an inland. I'm calling it inland woodland, but you can get inland woodland also near the coast. They just seem to be more open and have different trees than with the sequoias. And then I'll go into some ferns, sedges, rushes, and vines that grow within those riparian areas. And then I'll talk a little bit about pond plants and seasonal wet meadow plants. And then everyone loves certain plants that aren't too local, but I'll talk a little bit about those too, that are riparian plants. So I'll mostly stick with local. So what does riparian mean? Well, riparian is a complex of trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants found along ponds, streams, and rivers from a riparian community. The vegetation consists of species that require more soil moisture than other communities. Is that me buzzing?
Not sure.
Not sure. Each riparian community is unique with some common and uncommon species throughout the different watersheds. So say you go to Fall Creek in Henry Cow in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and then you go up north to another Redwood Creek. They're going to have some of the same species, but there's going to be species that are different within those. Riparian areas, habitats are ecologically diverse and are home to a wide variety of flora and fauna. Riparian areas can be found in many types of habitats, including grassland, wetland, and forest environments. These zones can act as natural biofilters, protecting from excessive sediments, polluted runoff, and erosion. So again, why is local important? Well, plants have been around here, and they're genetically adapted to our local climates and soil. They're also resistant to insect infestations, and they provide food and habitat for our native fauna. So, coastal redwood riparian. I'll go into the trees first, then the shrubs, and then the herbaceous perennials. So, Acer macrophyllum, big leaf maple, beautiful tree. It is deciduous, but you actually can get some nice fall colors with this tree, as the picture on the right, which was taken in March, and so the new leaves are coming out with the catkins, and then the foliage comes out after it flowers, and you get some nice fruit, which is coming in now in the summertime. And then we have Alnus rubra, the red alder, and this one grows in pretty deep shade, likes water. It's It's a great habitat plant for birds. It grows fast. And actually, if you have a lawn area that you're not getting rid of, this is actually one of those trees they recommend for lawn areas because it can handle all that extra water. And of course, Sequoia sempervirens, the redwood. This is the largest tree in the world, and it's actually our state tree. Another great habitat tree for birds and other critters. And then, of course, California Bay. It's pretty common growing in with the sequoia in these coastal riparian areas. The bay is evergreen and flowers in the springtime. It does gets those drupe. I think the fruit is actually called a drupe, and they're related to the avocado, which is interesting. And the critters love to eat these, squirrels, etc. And then some shrubs, Corylus cornutum variety californica, the California hazelnut. I think this is a beautiful tree. It's mostly a shrub. It can be a small tree. I think they get up to 8 feet. They have a very nice open habit, very delicate leaves that are hairy, and you're lucky if you can get the fruit before the critters do. It's edible by us too. But our California one is a little bit smaller than the one that grows up north in Oregon. They actually have a different variety, and it's the one that is used commercially for hazelnuts. This is an interesting shrub. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to see it, but it's a beautiful one. It's in flower. It's Western burning bush, Euonymus occidentale. And this grows in, if you're ever in the Santa Cruz area, I know it grows in Fall Creek, and you can get their flowers early spring, and then it has these really neat bracts. Is what you're seeing on the top is the bracts that have opened up after the flower, and that's the fruit below it, which has been getting eaten by the birds probably. This is a great favorite, an evergreen, wax myrtle, Myrica californica. It's a large shrub, small tree. The nice thing about Myricas is they are evergreen, which a lot of our natives tend not to be. And it does well with pruning. You can use it as a screen or a hedge, and you can be pretty hard with them, and they do fine. The birds really love the waxy fruit that they produce in the summertime. They're edible for them, and so it's a great attractor for habitat for birds. Another favorite, Rhododendron occidentale, Western azalea. These are just magnificent. They're one of my favorite shrubs. And when I'm walking in the forest, I can actually smell them before I see them. The scent from the flowers is just incredible. They're also deciduous. They grow with the sequoias, and they're usually in either creek sides or seasonal spring channels, and they're just really beautiful trees. They flower in the summertime, which is interesting. They're not a spring flower, so they've been flowering from, probably I've been seeing them from May, and I still see a few still flowering. So they'll flower through the summer. Another nice habitat plant for birds, hummingbirds especially, is the Ribisanguineum variety glutinosum, the pink flowering currant. This is actually a deciduous shrub also, and But if you give it a little extra water in the summertime, it will stay green. Another great thing about this shrub is it flowers in the wintertime when hardly anything else is in flower, thus bringing the hummingbirds. Just love this plant. And then edible berries in the late spring, early summer, which again, birds love. And people like them too. If you actually get a good crop, you can make jam with it. Then we have Rosa gymnocarpa. It's a deciduous shrub. It gets maybe 4 feet at the max. It's more delicate than the Rosa cal, and it's a great understory plant for any riparian area. Rubus parviflorus, the thimbleberry, it's a deciduous shrub. It gets to 8 feet. Again, this is another great habitat plant for birds and such. Flowers in the springtime and fruits at this time in the summer. And it's edible for humans and birds, which is nice. And the picture on the right didn't come out very well, but it's up at, does anyone ever go to Hidden Villa? This is along their creek trail, and there's nice patches of it up there growing along with the wood fern. Rubus spectabulus, I don't know if I've seen this species on this side of the hill yet, but it's definitely on the west side of the Santa Cruz Mountains in Butano, and I think it might be in a Big Basin. And so Rubus spectabulus, again, it's a deciduous shrub getting maybe 6 feet. Amazingly beautiful pink, bright flowers in the late spring, and then berries in the summer, which are edible by humans and birds. So it's another great habitat plant. These do spread by rhizomes, this species, so they can be a bit aggressive. If you want to kind of keep them honed in, you just you can use some root barrier, but they are beautiful. And then, of course, Vaccinium obatum, huckleberry. It's an evergreen shrub. They can get 8 to 10 feet, but they're very slow growing, and they tend to like acidic soil. They tend to grow with redwoods. I find that if they get a little bit more sun and not completely always in the shade, they'll fruit better. So they like a little bit more sun than you would think. But if they get too much sun, like they can't take full sun, the leaves will burn. And then we'll get into some perennials for the coastal area. Columbine, which is beautiful, early spring, flowers. I don't know what much more to say about it. I think it's a beautiful, delicate plant that adds color into the riparian garden. They are deciduous, so they're deciduous perennials, which means they'll go to sleep in the summertime, but then the plants will come back up in the spring. Aurelia californica, another one of these deciduous perennials, but it actually gets about 8 feet. They're just amazing. The leaves are like dinner plates, or bigger, beautiful, and they get these umbel of white flowers and these blackberries that the birds love. And then, of course, a perennial Artemisia douglassiana, mugwort. This can be used medicinally too. It is a bit aggressive, so if you have an area in your yard that stays a little moist, you can kind of let it go. You can prune it back really hard because it goes, if it gets pretty dry in the late summer, it'll go dormant, but they pop back up in the spring, and you can just cut back the dead stalks. Then another one of my favorites, Asarum caudatum, the wild ginger. And you hardly ever get to see the flowers because they seem to hide out underneath the big leaves. But this is an evergreen, and it's great for ground cover under redwoods, and it tends to like acidic soils also. And then Dicentra formosa, the bleeding heart, another deciduous perennial, comes up in the early spring, even maybe late winter, depending on the year. I see this a lot on the sides of banks near creeks that are seasonal, and just a really delicate show of pink flowers and nice foliage. And then Heuchera micrantha, the alum root. This is actually an evergreen, which is nice, and they tend to grow on rocky hillsides, near creeks and seasonally moist areas. And then they put off these really nice, delicate shows of white flowers, usually through spring. By summer, they're starting to go a little dormant, just the flowers, and you can just cut back the flower heads and still have a really nice green plant. Another nice favorite of the coastal redwoods is the Lilium pardalinum, the leopard lilies. These actually are flowering now in the summertime. They can be 8 feet high. I was just seeing them in Hidden Villa on the Creek Trail, and they're just magnificent. If you've never been able to see them in the wild, you got to go out and check them out because they're quite stunning.
So what's their life cycle? Do they?
So they're an herbaceous perennial. They're a bulb, basically. So what they do is they die back in the winter, late fall. After they flowered and fruited, they'll die back. You won't really see the plant all winter, and then come spring, they'll just grow, and they, as they get older, they become larger specimens because the bulb has become large enough to support the larger plant. And one plant can have, 15 flowers on it. They're pretty amazing. And then this is a coldspit, Pedicitis frigidus variety palmatus. You see this a lot on the creek sides in kind of sandy areas. It's a deciduous, it's a nice ground cover. The leaves are about this big. It's really beautiful. And then the flower isn't too much to speak of, really. It's in the Asteraceae, so they get a flower stalk and kind of little white flowers, but nothing to speak of. I think this plant's more about the foliage. And then Tyralia trifoliata, variety unifoliata, sugar scoops. These are all along in a redwood riparian area as a ground cover, and they will flower for months. I've been seeing this plant flower since early spring, and it's still flowering. So it's been flowering for a good 4 months or so. And it is evergreen, which is nice. So it likes the moisture and shade. The same with Tolema grandiflora. It's a deep shade lover. You get too much sun on it, and the leaves will kind of burn. But it's got this great inflorescence flower. And what you're seeing on the right is the flower, and actually the red part is actually the stamens. It's the male part of the flower that are kind of reflecting back. And so they call them French cups, I guess, just because they look like little cups. But the flower stalks can be about 2 feet at least. So it's kind of dramatic when they start flowering in the spring. And then Viola glabella is a great one for any moist areas. It does like part shade. It also is deciduous, but so basically it's deciduous in the fall and late winter, and then comes up in the spring, and it'll put off these nice little yellow flowers for a couple months, and they readily reseed themselves. So, but for the life of me, I'll collect the seed and try and propagate it, and it never works. But they reseed in all my pots. So it's one of those tricky ones, but you know, if you get it in your yard, you'll have a nice little display of it.
If you have the dog violet, are they going to mess each other up?
No, they won't. I don't know if the violet's hybridizing, because there are a few violets, like the Viola sempervirens, the redwood violet, grows in the same areas as this, and the other.
All three?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now I'll talk more about inland woodland riparian, and mostly that just means a bit more open areas like, so you've got, what do you have close to here? Coyote Creek is what I would consider this. There's also parts in Santa Cruz that can be this way too. And so we'll go into the trees, shrubs, and herbaceous perennials. So box elders, an Acer negundo. It doesn't get as large as the Acer macrophyllum. It maybe gets about 15 feet. It is deciduous. It doesn't quite get those same great colors as the Acer mac either, but it does get a little bit of the fall colors. And then it gets these really interesting fruit called samaras. And they kind of float down when they start becoming ripe, and they spin around. They're kind of neat. Of course, our buckeye, which is just an amazing tree. I think it's beautiful at all times of the year. They can get up to 10 feet, maybe 15. You can prune these. I've seen some in yards that have been pruned to keep them kind of lower. And they're just beautiful specimens because you get the beautiful flowers, big flower. That flower is probably this big. And the native bees love it. Supposedly the honeybees are allergic to it, but
I heard that it makes the honey bitter.
yeah, so I'm not sure, but I know our native bees love it. So. And then in the wintertime, just the skeleton of the tree itself is just beautiful to see. If you've ever seen these out in the wild, they're just up on Skyline. There's a lot of them, and you could go check them out. They're quite beautiful. And then on the east side of the Santa Cruz Mountain, you get the Alnus rhamnifolia. So it can take a lot more sun, and it does like water though. And they probably get about 20, 25 feet. They're deciduous, but they get these nice little cones of fruit, and the birds that eat seeds really like this plant, this tree. Then Fraxinus latifolia, it's an Oregon ash. I'm not sure, maybe we're in its southern range coming down here, but it is native. It grows in San Francisco Creek. If you ever go to El Palo Alto Park, there's a great place to see it just right down there. It grows right by the creek there. They don't get very big. They get maybe 15 or so feet high. They're deciduous, and they got these really beautiful fruits. And then our western sycamore, Platanus racemosa. This tree is huge. This is a tree near where I live that they recently had to cut back, I think, in order to save it. It's a really old tree. I think the trunk is, it's huge. The trunk is huge on this tree. It must be over 100 years old. They're deciduous, but you'll see a lot of them in Coyote Creek And unfortunately, a lot of people plant London plane trees, and they are hybridizing with our native sycamores, and it's kind of becoming a big mess, unfortunately. But they are beautiful trees, and they have that beautiful mottled bark that you can see. Populus fremontii, the cottonwoods, those are another beautiful tree, leaves. It is deciduous. It's related to the aspens that you see up in the Sierras. So they kind of got that shiny look to the underside of the leaves is lighter than the top side. And then we get into willows. I'll just talk about a few. But in the area, that I believe there's probably only 4 or 5 species. These are some of the common ones. This is Salix labiegata, the red willow. And they get maybe 20, 30 feet. They are deciduous. They have a beautiful furrowed bark, and they get these beautiful pinnate leaves on this species. They're deciduous, but willows are just great habitat plants. We have willows by the nursery, and we see so many bird species. They really love these plants for food and habitat due to the insects and seeds and such. And then our most common willow, the arroyo willow, the Salix lasiolepis, they consider it more of a shrub, but I have seen them get pretty big. But I would say they tend to stay more shrub-like. And the nice thing with willows is you can prune them really hard, and it doesn't even bother them. So you can prune them to shape and, even coppice them back if you want.
Do you have a trick for identifying?
I do.
Willows?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know it's red or?
I can tell you later. I'll tell you. I have some good field techniques that work all the time. They don't have to be flowering.
Is it going to cost me?
No, it's free. Yeah, you can all. Hey, we could do a willow talk sometime. I love willows. Sambucus mexicana is considered a shrub to a small tree. Blue elderberry, these are great habitat plants. They're fast growing. They're not super long lived, but I think if you prune them, you can keep them nicer, because they tend to get a little rangy after a while, but you can cut them back really hard and they'll resprout or just, but the native bees love the flowers and the fruit. The birds just love them. And you can, I don't think humans can eat it raw, but you can make preserves with them and wine, I've been told.
Definitely in England.
Yeah.
Elderberry wine, that's the thing.
Yeah. So, and then our local dogwoods, we have 2 species. This is the first, Cornus glabrata, the brown dogwood. It tends to be a little smaller than the next species. And let's see, they're deciduous. They're about, get about 8 feet, maybe at the most 6 feet. They tend to have a more sprawling habit out than up. And the birds do like the berries. They have a really nice umbel of flowers, and then they get kind of a bluish berry. And then the other species we have, which is a little bit more attractive, is the Cornus sericea, the creek dogwood. And this gets a little bit more taller than wider than the other species. And it gets about 8 feet. And this one actually gets really nice fall colors. You see the leaves will start to turn and they get red, and I've seen them become beautiful, almost like poison oak. You know how you see poison oak in the fall? It's just one of our most beautiful fall color plants. This is a lot like that. Linicera involucrata, the twinberry. This is a deciduous shrub. The hummingbirds love the flowers. I have one of these in a pot at the nursery, and I can just sit there and eat my lunch, and the hummingbirds are just all over it in the springtime. And then the robins have been coming in the summer eating the berries. So it's a really great habitat plant. I think they're quite beautiful. They can get kind of big. They can get about 6 feet. But you can prune them. Yeah, you can prune them. They tend to get kind of like this, but you can prune them. They take to pruning really well. They grow along with the dogwoods. They're companion plants. Along with this, all those species grow together. The Physocarpus capitatus, which is 9 bark. It's a really nice deciduous shrub. It has this great flower it gets in the late spring. And then the fruit is like a big puff. It puffs up like, I don't know how to explain it, but they're pretty interesting looking. Most of the time there's no seed in the fruit, which is interesting. I'm not sure why. The easiest way to propagate this one is by cuttings. But this grows in the San Francisco Creek, and it also grows in Pichetti Ranch, if anybody's ever been there. There's a creek by the main farmhouse, and they grow along this creek there. And then Ribes aureum, that's the golden currant. This can take a lot of sun. It's deciduous shrub. It gets about 8 feet tall. It gets these great yellow flowers in the spring, and edible orange fruit in the summer. The birds love it. And this one, unlike the pink flowering currant, can take a lot of sun. It just needs a little bit more moisture. And then Rosa californica, California rose. This spreads by rhizomes, unlike the Rosa gymnocarpa, which stays to itself. So unless you want a thicket of it, you need to use some root barrier. But it is a beautiful plant, and it's growing here along with the Artemisia doug. It's really quite beautiful. And then Symphocarpus albus variety lavagatus, the snowberry, another great habitat plant. The hummingbirds love the flowers because they're tube-shaped, and then the birds eat the berries, which are starting to happen now in the summer. So it's a spring flower. The leaves drop, in late fall, early winter. And then Epipactis gigantea, the stream orchid. That's hit and miss. I've never seen it around here. I've seen it in Monterey County, in Arroyo Seco River, actually. It's all over. You go along the creek, and it's all over with the carex. They're quite beautiful. But you can get them in the trade, and they're great for ponds, too. Mimulus cardinalis, the scarlet monkey flower. Great red flowers. We don't have a lot of natives with that color, and with the green, it's just pretty amazing. They get about maybe 1.5 feet tall. They are spread by rhizomes, so you got to be a little careful if you don't want them to take over. They're easy to pull up though if you don't want them traveling too far. And then Mimulus guttatus, great yellow, really likes moist areas. I've seen this along creek sides. You also, sometimes I see it in drainage areas, spring flowers, and the insects really love this plant too. And then Stachys pycnantha, which I don't know if too many people are familiar with it. It grows in the shade. It's a hedge nettle, and it's pretty much evergreen. I'd say it's semi-deciduous. It's also grows by rhizomes, so if you don't want it traveling too much, you need to pull it up, but it's the bees love it. I see bees on it all the time. And then into our fun ferns. So this is our 5-finger fern, the adiantum, and you can see it growing along with some of the coltsfoot, and this is always along on the banks of streams and creeks. And then Ethereum felix femina, the lady fern, they get really big, and it's actually a deciduous fern. So it's around most of the spring and summer, and in the winter it dies back to nothing. They get about 3 feet, 4 feet tall. They're quite beautiful. They look a lot like the giant chain ferns.
Can you tell me where we might see those? Because I don't think I've seen them.
I know in Santa Cruz County they're in Fall Creek everywhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then hit and miss over here. I can't think of a place right offhand.
How
Yeah.
big do they get?
They get big. 4 feet, easy. Yeah.
How big is the 5-finger?
So the 5-finger isn't that big.
Five.
Yeah, it's about like this. And it's also deciduous. It kind of dies back. So the whole frond is like that big, maybe. Yeah. The Blecnium spicant, the deer fern, is a really interesting fern. It's also, I don't know if it's too local here. It does grow in Fall Creek also. Fall Creek's amazing for ferns. If you ever get to Santa Cruz County, there's 12 species of ferns that grow in that park. So it's really diverse. This grows along the creek there, and it has 2 types of fronds, unlike most ferns. It has a taller frond that is its fertile frond, and then these are the unfertile fronds. And then sword fern, which gets really large. Actually, it can get 5 feet, 4 feet, and beautiful. They call it sword fern because where the leaflet is attached to the main part of the frond, there's a little hilt right there, actually. And if you go out in the woods, it looks a lot like the wood fern, but that's how you can tell them apart, is it's got a little hilt, which is kind of a fun little thing to know.
On the deer fern, how big does it get?
So the deer fern is more of a spreader instead of a tall guy, so it might spread a foot or 2, and then when it gets its fertile frond, it could be about a foot or 2. And the Woodwardia fernbrata is, of course, our biggest fern, giant chain fern, and those can, I've seen them as big as me. They're huge. They like water, and they are evergreen. So the old fronds will die back, and you can just prune them. And then Carex amphifolia, they tend to. This is a rhizominous sedge, big leaf sedge. It likes the damp, kind of shady areas. But if you have an area like that, they work well. They're evergreen too, which is nice. So, but they're rhizominous, so they spread. But if they won't spread into a dry spot, they'll just stay in their moist little habitat. And then Carex barbari, the Santa Barbara sedge, it can take it a little bit drier than the previous sedge, but also it's evergreen and tends to create areas by rhizome.
How big will that get? Tall?
It gets about 2-3 feet. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a patch around here. I know of one in Quail Hollow Ranch. That's in Santa Cruz County. I live in Santa Cruz County, so that's why I came. I know some of the areas around here. I think there are some areas along Coyote Creek that you see Carex barbari too, actually. Yeah. And this is a beautiful sedge that grows along rivers. It actually attaches to the rocks and grows right on the rocks. Carex nudata, the torrent sedge, and this was taken at the San Lorenzo River. So you get that real feel of the redwoods there. And then Juncus patens is a great specimen plant for the garden. It can actually take it a little bit drier than the other species I'll talk about. But they're just evergreen. They look like grasses, but they're rushes. And they can get maybe 3-4 feet, and they can get pretty wide over time. But you can prune them back if they're getting too big. But I think they make a nice show as a specimen plant in the garden. And then, of course, a few vines I'll talk about. I don't know if this locally too well, but supposedly it is in the San Francisco Bay Area. Uristilla Chloe californica. I've seen it a lot up by Sacramento, by the Sacramento River, though, and it grows in the riparian zone and creeps up trees.
So it can stay dampish?
Mm-hmm. It can. That's where I've seen it in the wild. Yeah. I think it does better if it's under like a shrub or a tree and it can climb on it. And then Clematis liquistifolia, the virgin's bower. This grows over, it's flowering right now in Los Altos by the Foothills College along the creek there. And that's where this picture was taken. And it's creeping up on the sambucus. Beautiful sprig of flowers, and then it gets these fluffy fruit that just fly in the wind. And then, of course, Vitis californica, the California grape, which is a great all-season vine because you get the fall colors, you get the flowers in the spring, and the fruit that brings in the birds. It's a great habitat plant. It's fast-growing for fences or such. And then ponds. I'll just talk real quickly about some ponds. Let's see, I have a little bit of time, I guess. This was taken up at Foothills Park, and so we'll be talking about, it's kind of a large pond. Okay. So marsh baccaris. This does good along ponds, but also in moist areas, maybe in your yard. It is rhizomatous. It's semi-deciduous. This plant's interesting. It's like the coyote bush. It's a dioecious, which means it has male plants and female plants. They're not on the same flowers. So if you didn't want it to seed everywhere, you could probably just get some males. But it is rhizomatous, but it's easy to pull up. And then Hoita macrostachyi, the leather root. This is a fun plant in the garden. I have it in my yard, and I find that the bees and the birds just love it. And it's deciduous. It gets maybe 7 feet tall, and it's in the bean family, so it gets these pea-like fragrant flowers, and yeah, it's a fun plant to have in the yard. And then Ciceranchium californicum, the yellow-eyed grass, pretty much stays evergreen, especially in moist areas, and a great yellow flower. And then,
when you say they are pond plants,
I don't mean they can be in the pond, but around ponds. Like, yeah, I'm not going to get into like those pond in, like,
on the edge.
yeah, edges, yeah,
So like if you have a small patch of lawn for your dogs, perhaps
exactly.
at the edge.
Yep, wet areas in your yard. The Eleochorus macrostachyi, the spikerush, I often see this in seasonal ponds even that dry up in the summer. It likes those moist areas, and then it'll just die back. And it looks like the grass. It's very delicate and pretty. Of course, equisedum, because they're evergreen, which is nice. And they can be in containers too. You've probably seen them when you drove up on the planters across the street. I think the building across the street has a bunch of equisedum in planters. So they're a fun plant. And this is the other Juncus effusus, variety pacificus, the Pacific bog rush. It likes it much wetter. So this is right on the edge of the pond where it stays murky and muddy and kind of wet, if you have an area like that. And of course our cattail, which is native, and all parts are edible, which is amazing. I have this Wild Foods book, and it talks about how you can make flour out of this and this out of that, and all parts of it are edible, which is an interesting fact. And then we'll go into, real quick, seasonal wet meadows, first perennials, grasses, and then sedges. Asclepias fascicularis, can't say too much about this, is a beautiful perennial. The larva of the monarch butterfly loves this plant. I'm hoping to get some at the nursery because I have a bunch growing right now, but I haven't seen any larvae yet, which would be fun. It's a beautiful plant, and the bees love it too. I see all kinds of native bees on it. So it likes those seasonally moist areas that go dry in the summer. The same with Ranunculus californicus, the California buttercup. It comes up in the late winter to early spring, which is nice. It's one of the first things that start to flower out in nature after winter. And Sodago californica, the goldenrod, it's a great nectary plant. It's like those seasonally moist areas. It's pretty much evergreen. I would say if it stays in an area that stays moist, or it has additional water in the summer, it'll stay green. And it flowers in the summer, which is nice. Not a lot of natives do that.
I get the coolest little tiny green bees on it.
It's a great habitat plant. And then a few of our great grasses, native grasses that like it moist, is Danthonia californica, our California oak grass. It's not a huge bunch grass. It gets maybe a few feet wide. It stays kind of low, and then it puts off a nice, the inflorescence kind of comes out at an angle. It's not like tall. It's kind of delicate. And then Hordeum bracteanthum, the meadow barley, it's rhizomatous, so it tends to be a huge patch of it when you do get to see it. It grows up at the open space I'm thinking about, the one next to Skyline, Russian Ridge. If you're ever up at Russian Ridge, there's a huge patch of it by the parking lot as you're walking up that trail on the right. It's beautiful. And then the Lamish triticioides, the creeping wild rye. It's a really nice perennial rhizomatous grass that likes moist areas, and it's got a nice blue-gray hue to the leaves for any areas that you have that are moist. Carex praegracillus is our local meadow sedge that likes, it can take part shade to sun and moisture. It can create a lawn area. If you've got an area that used to be a lawn and you want to redo it and let it go kind of wild, this is a great grass for that because it's rhizomatous. And then Juncus xiphoides is an interesting, they call it iris leaf rush. And if you look at the leaves, they actually look, before they start flowering, they look like little irises coming up, like blue-eyed grass or something. But they're actually a rush, and they like it really moist. And they're deciduous, so if you have an area in the yard that stays moist for a certain period of the year, like the spring, they're a good plant for that because then they'll die back in late summer, early fall. And then a few North Coast, Sierra foothills, and South Coast natives that everyone loves that I thought I'd throw in there for fun. So, of course, spicebush, Calacanthus occidentalis. If you ever go up to Yosemite, it's all over along the Merced River and up by the entrance to Yosemite. It was flowering. See, I was up there a month ago, and it was in full flower. It's quite beautiful if you've never seen it out in nature. They are deciduous. The flowers are fragrant. They get maybe 8 feet tall, maybe a little bit more. Beautiful specimen plant for the garden. So they can be in a woodland area, even with the western azaleas or under sequoias. Or
How wide and how much sun?
I would say part shade. I wouldn't say full sun. Probably morning sun, afternoon shade. I don't think it gets so wide. Maybe about like this. And then Carpinteria californica. You wouldn't think of it as a riparian plant, but actually, everyone kind of thinks of it as more of a dry. I recently saw where it grows up in the Sierra foothills, and it is growing in these rock outcrops, but these rock outcrops are all full of water from the snow melt. So I think they really like some water seasonally. And it was just a beautiful, they're very, they only grow in a small area. They're an endemic. They don't grow hardly anywhere else in California. They grow between the San Joaquin and the Kings River. And yeah, I was lucky enough to see them in full bloom this spring. That was nice. And then, of course, the redbud, the Cercis occidentalis. I've seen this a lot up on the Eel River, up in the rocks with Vitis californica, the wild grape. So, interesting. It's another one of those that you kind of think of as dry all the time, but I think it likes it a little on the moist side too. But it's a beautiful deciduous shrub. I think they get about 10, 15 feet, maybe. And of course, the flowers are stunning in the late winter, and then you get the foliage in the spring, and then the nice pods that turn red in the fall. And then Philadelphia's Lewisii mock orange, that's another one that I just recently saw flowering up in Yosemite by the Merced River. Beautiful, beautiful plant. It gets maybe 6 feet. Fragrant flowers, just amazing smell, if you've ever smelled them. And then Vengasia Carapasoides, that's a canyon sunflower, and that actually grows in Monterey County South. But it grows in canyons, deep shade. Could maybe take a little bit of morning sun. They get maybe 4 feet. Beautiful sunflowers in the shade. Yes, it's amazing.
Do they need much more water?
I would say medium. Yeah. I mean, they like a kind of a, I have it in my yard under oaks, and it seems to be doing pretty good. They can get rangy after a while, and you can just prune them back really hard, and they'll come back kind of more substantial. And then, of course, Darlingtonia californica, that's a fun plant. These grow in bogs, really, but I have seen them on the edges of creeks and rivers up north. They're a great specimen plant for a pot, too, actually. You can grow them in containers pretty well, actually. And they're quite beautiful. And then just some resources that I used, or you can use. The Jepson Manual, which hopefully, supposedly this year, the new one's coming out. We all have to learn new names for everything and forget names. And then Herbaria at Berkeley. And I used the Thomas Score of the Santa Cruz Mountains a lot. It's kind of an outdated book, but in a lot of ways it's full of resources that you don't get in any books anymore.
One of the things I like about the Thomas book is for each plant, it
Localities.
tells where you can find it. Or
Yep,
to be able-
I like that. Yep. And then I also use The Flowering Plants of Monterey Bay. That's a really great book too, by Corky Matthews. I think every plant in that book has an illustration. I love that. And then Cal Photos, if anybody ever has questions, they can go online and look at pictures on Cal Photos. It's a Berkeley site. I really like that. Sometimes I'm in question on something I've keyed, and I'll just type it in and look at the pictures and go, oh yeah, that is right, or oh, I'm way off. So it's nice. Yeah, CNPS and local native plant nurseries.